record this. We actually we didn't have the recording from last year, so I'm recording it now. We're going to learn about the building of the Mishkan and specific certain items, certain pieces of furniture that they use to build the Mishkan. So let me give you a little tour, actually. So you want to look at your cameras if you can. You want to look at the screen and hopefully see what's going on. Very interesting over here. So let me share it. Look at the pictures right over here. So we're gonna, some of them are sideways, but I think that's still hopefully manageable. Maybe I should really download it. Give me 1 second. Actually, no, I'm just gonna do it like this. So let's talk about the ark. We're gonna talk about the ark. I don't know if I said the menorah, I meant the table of bread, but let me give you a visual tour right here. Okay, so what you're looking at is a sideward picture, but hopefully you get it. This is the cherubs. We're gonna mainly talk about the cherubs that are on top of the ark. So there was a box, and the box was gold plated on the outside with poles that they would carry it in the desert. I believe the poles actually always stayed inside there, even when they weren't carrying it. Then you had another box made out of wood inside the golden box, and you had a golden box inside the wooden box. So basically a wooden box with a gold box outside it and a gold box inside it. Okay, and then inside this box, they put the tablets, and on top of the box, they built these beautiful, interesting covers to the this beautiful cover, solid gold, made out of cherubs that were hammered out of this one block of solid gold. And we're going to learn about those cherubs. They're actually a very interesting, fascinating part of the tabernacle, of the furniture, of the items that were necessary to be in the tabernacle. Here you can see this little picture here, what it looks like, about this very interesting thing that was required. Let's move on. We're also going to discuss today the showbread table. Basically, they would make 12 loaves of challah every week, and it would last. It would stay for a whole week. Here's like basic. You see a table, four legs and a table. Then you see like a frame, the table frame with the table on top with like a thick. The table that sits on the frame and the legs. And then they also had a crown representing royalty, which we're going to see in Rashi in a minute. They had a design. There's a debate exactly where that crown was. We'll see in a minute in Rashi. But there was this crown going around the table. Imagine like a beautiful design of a crown around the table. See it over here. See, there's like a crown with a frame kind of going around the table. So the table had a crown. And these are, you have to look at this picture to get it. It's much easier than the way Rashi is describing it. They made the challah. You'll see in figure A, there is a flat challah. Then they would turn it to figure B, make 4 corners on each of the challah. Very interesting. They would pull out 4 corner pieces like horns. Then after they did that, they would turn it. Look at figure C. They would turn that inwards. So the horns now are kind of facing inwards. So this is what it looked like. It had like a flap, like a bottom with 2 flaps sticking out with protruding like in figure D. That's exactly what the challah, very interesting challah. It's not like the way we make it today with braided challah, but they actually called it lechem haponim, bread with a face, because it looked like it kind of had a face on each side. So that's why they called it actually lechem haponim. And that was a required very interesting that they had to make the bread. They would bake it in these iron pans. You see pans that would support the kind of interesting challahs that they were making. After they would make the dough, they would shape it inside these pans. And then after it was baked in an iron pan, they would put it onto a golden pan, and where it would sit on the table where it would sit for a whole week inside the Beis Hamikdash. Now, very interesting to show you, they had other pieces which the Torah is going to talk about. I'm going to show you. They didn't want the breads to sit on top. They were basically like on shelves. Imagine you go to the bakery and you see bread that's on shelves like in the bakery. So they didn't want to have the breads stacked up right on top of each other. It would smush it probably, and also it would get moldy. So they had a system, which you see these long poles with kind of, like a big pole going all the way from the bottom all the way up. Again, this picture is sideways, but basically, this was attached to the table, the bread table I showed you before. It was just a table. This was attached to it, stood on both ends of the table like racks. Okay, and they had these you see these little poles that were half that would sit on the rack, so the challah would kind of slide on to the table and then sit on those racks, and the next challah would sit on the rack. So instead of the challah sitting on top of each other, they had a frame with these poles that the challah would sit one on top of another instead of sitting right on top of challah. This is what it would look like. Again, I'm sorry that it's sideways. I should have done it before. I didn't flip it over, but basically this is what you have over here. You have the a frame going all the way up with these little racks, and the challah sitting, instead of the challah sitting on top of challah, the challah sat on top of the rack that was next to it. Okay, here's another picture of the other side, the way you would look at the bread, you know, the way you notice the bread with the challah sitting on top of it. We're going to learn it inside. I hope that was clear, hopefully somewhat clear, and people get the picture of the way that they would make the bread. The bread symbolized our sustenance, our food, just like we say in Berchat HaMazon. Thank you, Hashem, for providing us with everything that we need, with our nourishment and everything that we need. That is that's what we'll learn in today's Chumash. We'll begin with the covering to the ark, and then we'll move on to the table of bread. So for those that don't know, very interesting class on exactly what was the furniture, what were the items that Hashem wanted to be inside the Mishkan. We're going to learn the whole week. We're going to learn about the different items that was inside the Mishkan in detail. So now, pictures is like 1,000 words. Now we're going to break it down in the blueprint. Imagine someone was typing up the directions. Hashem was telling Moshe what to build. So here we go with Hashem telling Moshe in text via Chumash and with Rashi's explanation on what exactly Hashem was telling him to build, as the pictures we just saw. You should make a ark cover. Kapiris is the cover to the ark. There should be a cover, and the cover should be made out of zahav tahor. Should be made out of pure gold. Okay, you should make it pure gold. No wood. It should be solid gold. Amasayim v'chetzi arkoi. It should be 2.5 cubits wide. V'ama v'chetzi rachboi, and a cubit and a half thick. Now I'm just going to use the word cubits. It's just easier than continuing to calculate it into feet. But basically, I mean, there's different opinions exactly how much it is, but a cubit is about 1.5 feet. So when we say a cubit, 1.5 feet, so like, for example, 2.5 cubits, length is whatever, a little bit more than that, 3.5, whatever it is, 4.5 feet was the length of it. So it was a nice big box. So it was 2.5 cubits wide by 1.5 cubits, 2.5 cubits long by 1.5 cubits wide. This is the cover. This is a nice size, big cover made out of pure gold. This very interesting cover that was covering on top of the ark where the luchos would go. Okay, Vasisa, and you should make verse 18. And sorry, I forgot to mention. Rashi said this cover fits snugly, exactly on top of the box. So the box had a complete cover covering the entire box. It had a complete cover covering the entire box, so you wouldn't see the opening of the box at all. It sat snugly right on top of the box under it where the ark was. Verse 18, Vasisa Shnaim Kruvim, and on that cover, very interesting, you should make something called cherubs. So it shouldn't just be a regular cover. Hashem wanted a very interesting design of a figure. It's interesting because Hashem usually doesn't want us to make figures. Again, obviously no idolatry, things representing Hashem, but Hashem wanted on top of the tablets to make this thing called the cherub on top of it. What? 2 cherubs, not just one, but to have 2. And we're going to learn exactly the features and how they are. Very interesting. So he says, what is a cherub? What is a cherub? So Rashi tells you right away, it's a face of a child. Hashem wanted there to be on the ark a figure, 2 figures with faces that look like a children. That I guess when you make this kind of a figure, it should look like the face of a child. More than that, very interesting the directions here. It should be miksha tasa oisam. You shall make them of hammered work. What does that mean? You should make them of hammered work. You should not, as a normal, regular, goldsmith would do, is they would make a cherub, and then they would solder the cherubs to the cover. Hashem wanted that the same block of gold, use a huge block of gold. I guess if it would be square, they would make a massive block of gold, heavy, big piece of gold. And out of that, hammer out, chisel out the cherubs and the cover all from one piece of gold. Don't solder it, don't make it separately and then solder it together. But Hashem wanted them to hammer out from this big block of gold, besides the cover, the cherubs, out of that same block of gold, you should hammer out the features of this cherub. So another very interesting rule is that you got to use the hammer and the mallet, as Rashi says, and chisel it out. It cannot be soldered together. And Mishnei Tzeis HaKaporos, where on the ark do I want these two cherubs to be? As we saw in the picture, on the two ends of the ark, place these two cherubs at the end of the ark. Now, fine, very nice. So we're making two cherubs on two ends of the ark. He says, not in every corner of the four corners of the cover, because it has four corners, should you make a separate cherub. I want a total of two. Each end at the length of the cover should have two cherubs. Mina kapoiras tasos akruvim, and again, as we said in the earlier verse, it should come out from the same block of gold that the cover came out from. Ashneik tzeisav on the two ends. Very clear directions and instructions. You know, if you're reading a text, a blueprint about instructions, how to make something, Hashem is being very specific that how he wants, when he say corners, I don't mean each of the four corners, I don't mean four, I want specifically two, and I want it to be at the two ends of the things, and I want it to be a feature of a baby face. Now, not just that, Hashem wants something else attached to this feature. I want them to have wings. And I specifically want the wings to be hammered in a way that the wings are spread out upwards. That they're covering, like a cover, big wings covering ala kapiris on the ark. So the ark has these beautiful golden cherubs that have a baby face with wings, and the wings are hovering above the ark, covering, acting almost as like a shade, as a shelter to the ark. Upaneim ishal achiv, and the cherubs' faces are facing one another. So now also, because you can make two cherubs, they can both be facing the north, the east, the south, they can be facing away from each other. Hashem says, no, I want these cherubs with these big covering wings, okay, high above. He says they were 10 tvachim. They weren't just like little wings. They were big wings going high up. They were 10 hand breadths, a nice height on top of the big wings covering up high above the cover. And they would cover, and they're covering the ark, and I want them facing each other. So that these two cherubs with wings hovering up above the cover of the ark are standing there. The two cherubs are facing each other. So their face is a little bit slanted, he's saying downwards, kind of that they're looking somewhat at each other. They're facing each other, but also facing a little bit downwards, as if they're looking, these baby faces on the cherubs are looking with their eyes, also faced on an angle that they're looking at the cover, at the ark. At the cover, they're facing each other, but also facing a little bit downwards. Very interesting. And then, what do I want you to do after that? I want you to insert the tablets into the ark. After you put the tablets into the ark, take the cover, put it milamaila. After you put the ark and the testimony in there, the tablets that God gave Moshe, he wanted you to then take this cover and put the cover on top of the ark, and you've completed the most holy item that the Jewish people have, the most very famous item that the Jewish people have that Indiana Jones is still looking for till today. The ark that Hashem commanded the Jewish people right here in our Chumash today, that Hashem commanded them to build this magnificent, beautiful box with a beautiful cover, with beautiful cherub formation on top of the cover, exactly how Hashem is commanding the Jews to build it. Now, what am I going to do with this box? Very important, very holy. I'm going to arrange my meeting with you there. This holy box that you are building, that will be the place that I will communicate. When I will speak to you, that will be the item, how through it, near it, with it, as we'll see in a moment, I'm going to communicate. This is going to be the holy item that Hashem will communicate with Moshe Rabbeinu. This item that you're building will be the teleporter, whatever you call it, the telephone to Hashem, that Hashem will communicate with Moshe. Hashem says, between, I'm going to communicate to you between the two cherubs, because remember, they're facing each other, between the two, Asher al-Arain, Hedus, that's on these cherubs that are on the ark. It's called Asher Atzava Oischa. Everything that I'm going to command you will go through this special radio waves that will go through this cherub situation. Bnei Yisrael, everything that I will command you to tell the Jewish people will go through the cherubs of the item that I'm commanding you to build. So it's a very important piece. This is the piece where the communication is going to take place between you and them. Now Rashi asks a question. He says, we see a contradiction that we find elsewhere, that it says that how did God communicate with Moshe? God would somehow let Moshe know that he wants to talk to him. Moshe would come running or walk or go to the tent of meeting, to the temple, to the ark at the time, not to the ark, to the actual sanctuary. And Moshe would stand by the doorway to the sanctuary, and God's voice would come down through the sanctuary to the front door of the sanctuary, and Moshe would stand there and Moshe would hear the message. So how did Moshe hear God's voice? On one hand, it tells us it went through the cherubs. The cherub was a communicator. On the other hand, it says Moses would stand by the doorway to the tabernacle, to the shul, and Hashem would communicate there. And Rashi says they're both correct. The voice of Hashem had a very specific journey, a path. It would come down straight into the Holy of Holies, into the ark, go between the cherubs, move out. Imagine like a voice that's not surround, so it doesn't spread around. A very direct path, come to the door of the tent of meeting. Moshe Rabbeinu would stand there, and that's how Moshe Rabbeinu would hear. So they're both true. Come down to the cherubs. From the cherubs, go to the door of the tent of the meeting, and that's how Hashem would always communicate with Moshe Rabbeinu. Very interesting. So again, a very important piece of a fixture, a furniture, an item, the holiest item the Jewish people have, where the tablets will go, and Hashem's voice will communicate to Moshe Rabbeinu through the cherubs. And that is the end of the first item in the Parshas Truma. The first item we're talking about, the holiest item. Start with that, and let's move on to another. Now, we all know that, we didn't discuss today in our class the actual boxes, how they were built. They also had a crown that represented the royalty of Torah. And now we're going to move on to the next item, the table of bread. Very interesting item. If I remember correctly, what was the purpose of the table of bread? Hashem supports all our food, all our needs. So they had a sacrifice of bread that every day they would break. Thank Hashem for providing us, and ask Hashem to continue to provide us with food. So how did they do that? They had a sacrifice of the breads, which was the bread table with 12 loaves would sit on the table, 6 on each side, on top of each other. As I showed you in the pictures, we'll discuss it now, always there representing the needs and the table of the Jewish people. And by the way, the table of royalty even is going to have a crown too, because the table of a person shows also their home is their bread, their table where they eat, and that represents the royalty of the person in their house. V'asisa shulchan, so make a table. This is the commandment to build a table. The table should be made out of atzei shittim, should be made out of acacia wood or pine wood. Should be a nice, good pine wood. Amasayim orkoi, it should be 2 cubits. Its length, so it's a little bit shorter. The ark, I believe you said, was 2.5 cubits. This is a little bit, the length is a little bit shorter, 2 cubits length. Rachbai should be its length. V'ama v'cheitzi koimas. I'm sorry. Again, shtei amasim arkoi. Its length was 2 cubits. V'ama rachbai, and its width was very narrow. It was 1 cubit, 1.5 foot was its width. V'ama v'cheitzi komas. And also, we're going to tell you the height here that it was a cubit and a half, so about 2 feet, a little more than that, was its height. So it was a smaller table, 2 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits height. And Rashi tells you when we're telling you the height, that it's a cubit and a half, we're including the frame of the table, like a table has 4 legs and a frame to hold the legs together. And then on top of the table sat a thick piece of pine wood that made up the actual table top, the cover, the thick wood that sits on a table. And together with this cover of the table, Rashi says it was a cubit and a half. So I don't know, was it 2.5? I'm not doing the math right now, but 2.5 feet high was this table. Now on that table, I want a design. Hashem tells you what design he wants. Well, first of all, he tells you on the wood, I want, as a lot of other things in the temple, I want it to be gold plated. You should put pure gold. So all the wood you shouldn't see the wood, the pine wood. You should see gold. I want everything covered in pure gold. And the design on it, I want it also as the ark to have a crown, a nice design of a crown on the top of the table. I want it to have a crown. Rashi says, why does I get it why the ark needs the ark needs a crown, the crown royalty of Torah. What about the table? So this is the crown of kingship. The table of a person represents wealth and greatness, is the royal table. So this is like God's royal table here, representing kingship and royalty and wealth and greatness. And therefore, the table also needs to have a crown on top of this table that's going there. Now, how are all the breads, though? I'm sorry, not done yet. On that table, Hashem says also, I want a frame. I want a little frame going around too by the crown. I want a hand thick, a couple inches thick frame. You should make a gold crown for its frame all around. So there's debate here. I believe there's a little bit of debate here exactly where this crown and this frame was. Some people say, I believe, that the frame, this a few inch thick frame, was on the top of the table, so it had like a lip around the table with the crown on that lip. Other people say that it is the frame was below the tabletop, right under the tabletop. They made this design, this frame around it that went on the legs, right on the top of the legs, right before it got to the top of the table is where this frame was, and where the crown was on top of that frame. So a little bit of discussion where exactly this frame and this crown was. Okay. Now, as everything else, needs to have the carrying poles. You'd have to be able to carry it in the desert. So, I want you to make 4 golden rings, and I want you to screw on, to place on, to solder on the rings to the 4 corners by the 4 feet. So the table has 4 feet. By each of the 4 feet, put 1 ring. The ring should be next to that frame that was surrounding the tabletop, right? We said there was a little frame there, a few inches thick frame that was going around. You put those golden rings on the frame at the tip, right by each leg. And these rings should act as houses, levadim, to the poles. So why do you need 4 rings? Because you're going to stick poles in them, let's say, says Hashulchan, in order for you to carry the table. So I need you to make sure nothing should be missing in the design here. Has to be a table, there has to be 4 legs, there has to be a tabletop, there has to be a frame, there has to be a crown, and on the frame that's going around the table, you need to put in 4 golden rings. Why do we need the 4 golden rings? Because we're going to put poles in them that when you walk through the desert, you should be able to have the poles inside them. Now, what about the poles? The poles themselves are made out of the same acacia or pine wood. And they also, everything has to be covered with gold. Besides themselves, don't even make the poles just wood. They need to be covered with gold. You're going to carry the table using these poles, these carrying beautiful golden carrying poles, carrying the golden table whenever they would need to carry it. Now let's talk about the framework design that was attached to the table where the challah sat on. So let's talk about a little bit, a little bit hard words here, but we'll try to translate. Vasisa kar oisov. You're going to make this is the molds. Remember, I told you the challahs I showed you were very unique. They were like flat and then turned up sideways and then had turned inwards a little bit and had 4 corners, 4 horns protruding out of it. Like I showed you in the beginning of the class, the picture. They had to be made in very specific kind of molds that could support the flat and then going upwards. So like they were these unique pans to bake the challah in for this structure. You had to make these unique pans to hold the bread. And as I told you, there were 2 pans. There was one, I think it was like an iron pan that they would actually put the challahs in the oven. But then when they took it out, they put it in a gold, just like everything else was gold. They would take the challah out of these unique breads out of the pan and put them in the next pan, the golden pan, to store them on the table for the week. So that is the word karoisov. Those are those pans. And then you had to make kapoisov. This is another thing I didn't mention yet. On top, there were basically 2 mountains of challahs, two how do I want to say it? 2 piles of challahs. So 6 on one side and 6 on another side. On top of those 2 mounds of challahs, you had a little bowl hanging off the frame. So they had this high, long frame going up going up above, higher than the challah, and there was a place on top of each pile of challah with a bowl. In that bowl, they would put frankincense, like a kind of a spice that was a sacrifice to Hashem, and they would sit on top. These 2 bowls with frankincense, a kind of a spice, would sit on top of each of the piles of challah. Very interesting. So kapoisov is that bowl that they would put on top of the challah. Next thing, vikassoisov. Those are the poles that the bread sat on. Katsoisov is the half pipes. I showed you the picture before. The bread, instead of piling the 6 challahs one on top of another, we know what happens when you pile bread, they all get smushed and they get ruined, especially this very unique challah that has a very delicate face that it's turned in and these horns that are protruding out. We don't want to smash them. So they would make shelves would come out, and the challahs would sit on those half pipes, these little pipes that would act as the shelves. They would sit on them. And again, as Rashi says, we didn't want the challah to sit on top of each other because then they would become all moldy. Asher yusach behen, and zahav ta umani koisav. I'm sorry, and these little half pipes would sit on a framework. On each end of the table went up this big tall frame, and the poles would sit on the frame. So the framer going up is called mani koisav. Asher yusach behen zahav tar, and which supported the pipes that the challah sat on. And you should make a tasa oisim, you have to make everything pure gold. So this whole situation here, it needs to be made out of pure gold. So when you look at the table, everything is gold, either gold plated or made out of gold itself. This beautiful table that I'm talking about over here. I'll go back to the picture again for a second when I'm done. And you'll make the face bread, the show bread. It's called the bread of a face because it looks like it has a face because of the horns that are protruding out from both sides. And there's, and then you put all these breads of Fanei Talmud before of Hashem constantly in order that Hashem should remember the needs of the Jewish people. Let me bring back the picture for 1 second for those that are still here, in case you didn't see before. Hold on, where is it? I think this is it. Yeah. Sorry. So this is the show bread. You notice the table, and then the breads, very unique breads. I'll go back over the pictures. How you see here's the frame going up on top of the table, and you have each of the pipes coming out, which is the bread, instead of sitting on top of each other, are sitting on the half pipes that are attached to the frame that's going up on top of the table. That is, you see here's the half pipes, and there's the frame going up, which the pipes would sit on, that the challah would sit on those pipes. Here are the pans again. Here's the unique show bread that they would sit on top of that table. Here's the crown that went on top of the frame that was on the table. And that is the end of today's Chumash. Any questions or comments on today's interesting Chumash?